accept such things, then they were even more foolish than she had thought. She was musing over the situation as she groomed her beloved Griffin, Boreas, named for the harsh and cutting northern wind that was so very dangerous to anybody unfortunate enough to get caught in it, when Princess Lysara, who had apparently developed a relationship to the Bernadornish prince of all things, came striding into the stables where they housed the Griffins. There was a bite mark on her neck. Kira blamed the stress of being heir to the Weirwood throne, a mother, and a warrior for her princess lapse in mental capacity. Lysara was the heiress to the throne, yes, but she was still a young woman, and anybody would struggle juggling all of those essential and important roles, especially without somebody to lean on. At least a foolish relationship was the worst of it. There were records and tales of far worse occurring, such as Brandon the Burner stupidly destroying the Northern fleet built by his father, Brandon the Shipwright, in a fit of grief at the disappearance of his father on a voyage when the Burner was 4 and 10. And despite what many feared, those who had grown as part of Lysara's wolf pack knew her too well to think that she would be easily manipulated into changing their ways to be more southern. Even by her lover and the father of her daughter. Anyway, she had passed the trials twice, so nobody had any legitimate grounds to object to her ascending to the Weirwood throne on the death of King Eddard, and Kira prayed that would be a long time away in the future. The king was a good, strong warrior with a shrewd mind. He would surely go down in history along with the greats of his ancestors, like the Hungry Wolf or Queen Kira the Sister She-Wolf, who had ended the 1,000-year-long war across the water and permanently conquered the Sisters. The gods themselves were said to intervene in the trials, though the details were kept secret from everyone, even the Starks themselves. Lysara had twice succeeded in the trials and had led the army to victory against the most recent White Uprising. She was the future queen, and nothing would change that. Kira would stand by her princess, even if she disapproved of the lover Lysara had chosen. "We have received word," the princess announced, not bothering to waste time with pointless greetings and expressions of obeisance the way the Southrons did. "That the Western army is currently at Golden Tooth. When they arrive at Pink Maiden, we shall be there to greet them." They all grinned bloodthirsty grins at that. Northrons were born and bred fighters. Fighting was a part of their everyday lives from their births. They fought the land they lived on, they fought against the ravages brought by winter and the animals that roamed their lands. They fought the Burners to the south and they fought the Wildings and Whites to the north. One did not survive in the Winterlands if they were not strong in either mind or body, or, preferably, both. Eventually, most people tended to start craving the rush of battle. If they didn't, they weren't going to last much longer. "Captain White Wolf," the princess turned to her. "Yes, my princess." Kira stepped forward. Princess Lysara smiled at her, a shark-like smile that showed her fangs off. Her direwolf types padded in a circle, tail sweeping from side to side. "You will take Boreas," she instructed her. "And fly to where the Western army is camped. Find out everything you can, then return and report." Kira smirked in anticipation. "Try not to raise any suspicion," the princess added. "But if necessary. Well, the important part of your task is that you return alive to complete it. Do whatever needed to ensure that occurs." Kira bowed. "I will not fail you, my princess," she vowed. "None of my people have ever failed me, or my house," Lysara answered without batting an eyelid. None of them could, or tried to, stop themselves from straightening up in pride at that. Chapter 17. The Higher You Rise. The Riverwall Garrison, 25th May, 303 AC. Oberyn. Oberyn twirled the spear he had been given in one hand as they waited. It was made of ironwood, and had a slightly different weight to the Dornish spears he was used to using, but it was close enough that he was confident it would not affect his skills. The Northern soldiers were gathered into a dozen columns, with a shield wall at the front, waiting quietly and patiently for their enemies to advance. Their discipline was admirable, but then, this was an army made up of trained and blooded warriors, not the small folk conscripts used by the Southern armies. Oberyn himself stood just beside the front of the line, alongside Sora, who was perched on top of her direwolf, which was a frankly intimidating and extremely attractive sight. All the Northrons were wearing rather form-fitting clothes that showed a wonderfully scandalous amount of skin. Egon and Oberyn were on his other side, much to his dismay. For all he knew that they were both extremely capable warriors, he loathed his eldest daughter and nephew being in danger. He was not particularly fond of Sara putting herself at risk either, but he was not about to say so. Despite what his siblings thought, he did in fact have some sense of self-preservation, and he guessed that if he ever dared to breathe a word implying that she might be better off away from the battlefield, he would find himself with a dagger buried in his stomach. According to the scout, a Northern woman by the name of Kira of House White Wolf, who had the hardened air of a veteran in spite of her being only a few years older than Sara, whom, admittedly, was also a veteran of many battles, the West's army was about 28,000 strong by her count. The numbers made sense at any rate, as the West could field about 50,000 men, if they depleted their castles of any defenses and recruited every green boy and old man as levies. The Stark's spies had informed them that the Old Lion had taken around 10,000 men to secure the capital after his daughter's coup, and those men combined with another 2,000 that he had donated to the City Watch after his daughter's marriage to Roriger, an act that much of the small council had opposed but Roriger had allowed in the name of keeping the peace with his good father, and had eventually led to Cersei's takeover being possible, meant that there was about 12,000 Westermen in the capital. Then they would have needed to leave a minimum force of 10,000 behind to defend their own keeps and lands, leaving 28,000 to march east to the Crown lands so that they could reinforce the capital. Their own host, meanwhile, was currently made up of the troops loaned by the North. Although King Eddard had only sanctioned the loan of 4,000 soldiers to follow them to the capital, Sara had agreed to have the garrison of the Riverwall, one of their strongest guarded, with 13,000 men and women lining it, aid them in this particular battle until the Valyman could arrive at last. Due to that, they would have 14,000 soldiers on the field today, with 3,000 of the garrison being kept behind in reserve. Of those troops, 500 were wargs. Oberyn's knowledge of numbers said that 14,000 would never manage to beat a host of almost 30,000. Oberyn's knowledge of and experience with the skills and fighting tactics of the Northrons said that there would be nobody left of the Lannisters' army by the time the Winterlanders, who had been disturbingly gleeful about sending the fucking burners to rot in their precious Seven Hells, were through with them. In truth, the 500 wargs alone would likely be able to defeat the Westermen. Oberyn still had nightmares about the war 2 decades past. The sight of the giant animals ripping his men apart had imprinted itself on the backs of his eyelashes. He was very relieved that he was on their side this time. "The enemy approaches, my princess," somebody called. Sara had instructed them to use Andai for the sake of the Southrons with them, though the group had begun picking up bits of the old tongue over their time with the Northrons. "Ready yourselves," Sara called back. "Archers, knock arrows." They were tucked out of sight on a ridge, looking down over their enemies. The Westermen were marching into view. They had no idea that they were about to be ambushed. Aegon had originally been going to send them a request for parley before fighting, and the Winterlanders had looked at him as if he were madder than Aes. In truth, Oberyn had been rather disappointed by his nephew's naive suggestion as well. He had thought that he'd taught Aegon better than that. "Why would you do something like that?" Sara had demanded incredulously. "Offer parley after we have defeated them. Do not be a fool and take away our advantage of surprise." Oberyn and Sir Oswell had both agreed, and that had been that. The archers, who were all hovering on their griffins, knocked their arrows. "Draw!" Robb yelled. The archers pulled back. "Aim! Fire!" On the final order, the archers loosed a rain of death on the unsuspecting Westermen. The enemy's rows were broken and scattered by the surprise attack, and the commander's attempts to rally their men failed with another series of arrows being sent at them. "Charge!" Sara cried. Drummers began beating their instruments. It was a fascinating technique, apparently invented by Prince Mathos the musical wolf, allowing orders to be communicated via different rhythms that the soldiers were all trained to recognize, whilst at the same time confusing the enemy and sparing the commanders the loss of their voices from bellowing orders halfway across the field over the sounds of weapons clashing. Oberyn himself wouldn't be able to distinguish one beat from the other if his life depended on it, but the Northrons had been doing so for years, and they reacted on instinct to the slightest change in beat. They charged down the ridge to the shocked Westermen, and more than a few terrified green boys turned tail and fled as if demons from the deepest of the Seven Hells were nipping at their heels. Oberyn himself thundered down on his borrowed steed. He quickly found himself in the middle of the melee, separated from his daughter and nephew but still able to see where Sara was. She had dismounted from her canine companion and was in the middle of slashing and hacking any Westerman unfortunate enough to cross her path into a dozen pieces while types rampaged through the battlefield, tearing a bloody swathe through the Lannister men. In other circumstances, he would have been entranced by the sight of Sora, and the way she made fighting seem as elegant and graceful as a dance. But as it was, he was currently fighting a deadly battle, and thoughts of how beautiful and deadly his Winterlander lover was, as well as concern for both her, his daughter and his nephew /King all had to be put to the side so that he could focus on staying alive. Underscore 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 underscore. King's Landing, the 4th of June, 303 AC. Sir Davin Lannister. Sir Davin Lannister, cousin to the legendary Lord Tywin Lannister, had never before had to retreat from a battle, yet he had fled the battle at the Riverwall. Of the 28,000 levies he'd had at the start of the battle, a bit less than half remained to him. Many of the raw recruits had fled in terror of the Winterlanders, whilst most of those who had remained to fight had been killed. He didn't know how he would ever be able to show his face again, with his reputation so stained. Well, if his head of house decided to kill him, he wouldn't need to worry about that. At least he had managed to rally his disorganized and wounded forces enough to retreat, and they had been allowed to leave. And they were definitely allowed to flee, because they had not been chased and the barbarians had practically made way for them to escape towards the Crown Lands, whilst blocking any other possible escape routes, including the one leading back towards the Westerlands. It had taken some time for Davin to understand, but he had come to a realization eventually. The Northrons wanted them to get to King's Landing. They wanted the Crown to know that they were coming en masse, that their doom was coming. The gates leading into the capital were shut and barred when Davin's ragged and exhausted forces staggered up to them. He had barely allowed them time to eat and piss, let alone sleep, too desperate to get to the capital and tell Tywin what had happened. "Who goes?" a watchman demanded from his position atop the walls. He, and many others lining the wall, aimed crossbows and regular bows at Davin's host, prepared to fire on any enemies mad enough to attack the capital of the Seven Kingdoms. "Sir Davin Lannister." Davin yelled back. "I bring reinforcements for His Grace King Ina to defend against the rebels. I must speak with Lord Tywin straight away." They allowed them entrance. Janos Slynt, the commander of the City Watch, greeted him with a look of mockery. "So these are your reinforcements," he scoffed. "Doesn't look like they could tell the difference between a blade and a hilt." "What? Monsters, monsters, they were monsters." He paused on hearing what a young green boy was weeping. "We're dead, we're all dead. The barbarians will kill us all. The Winterlanders are invading, we are all doomed." Janos Slynt, who for all his faults did have some sense, in that he was ever ready to protect himself, and who had also fought in the previous war, went pale. "He's mad," the man croaked, panic flicking in his eyes. "The Winterlanders know, 'tis not possible. The boy is mad. I must speak with Lord Tywin immediately," Davin insisted. Slynt looked even more horrified when his almost pleading statements that the lad was mad were not confirmed. I, he muttered, paler than a ghost. "Oh, you," he pointed at another watchman. "Escort Sir Davin to Lord Lannister, right away. Go, idiot. Hurry up and do not keep the Lord Hand waiting." As Davin hurried after his assigned guide, he said a silent prayer that the phrase "what goes around comes around" would not come true for his house. Otherwise, the next ballad written about the House of Lions would be the Rains of the Rock, instead of Castameria. More than that, he prayed that he was not about to pay the price for the Winterlanders winning the battle. Underscore 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 underscore. The Red Keep, the 4th of June, 303 AC. Tywin. Tywin seethed as his cousin left, blatantly relieved that the old lion had not taken his anger out on the messenger. This was an utter disaster. The Winterlanders had now officially entered the war, and their already hopeless cause was in complete ruins now. Damn his idiot daughter for her foolish recklessness. What in the gods' names had possessed her to perform a coup, and why was it so hard for her to do a proper one? Tywine was not one to dismiss a woman solely on her gender. His beloved Joanna had been a political genius hidden by sweet smiles, and his sister Jenna was the shrewdest lady that Tywine knew. Why then was Cersei such a fool, with examples such as her mother and aunt to follow? A knock interrupted his attempts to figure out a way to salvage the wreck that his children were making of his legacy. "What?" he barked. "Who is it?" A trembling servant stuck his head around the edge of the doorway and held out a letter in a shaking hand. "A letter for the crown, your lordship," he muttered, eyes fixed firmly on the floor. "It seems that copy was sent to every lord in Westeros." Tywine narrowed his eyes at that, already anticipating what it was. The Winterlanders always sent out letters on the onset of a war, informing the lords and ladies of the south as to why they were attacking. Usually it happened after the fighting had already begun, so they did not lose the advantage of surprise, but it always came eventually. "Leave." Tywine snapped as soon as he had snatched the envelope out of the servant's hand. The young boy practically ran away, as Tywine used his old letter opener, a gift from his late wife, to open the envelope. Reading it, his nostrils flared and his heart started to have palpitations. He had to read it through twice before he was able to accept his child's stupidity. The 8th of April, 303 AC /8791 AW. Winterfell. The North. The Winterlands. To whom it may concern. This is a formal declaration of war between the Winterlands, consisting of the North, the Three Sisters, the Iron Islands and the Northern Riverlands, and the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, former wardens and lords paramount of the West. All titles of the aforementioned house have now been stripped and attainted due to the treasonous actions of the house by His Grace King Aegon Targaryen, 6th of his name, King of the Six Kingdoms. This declaration is based on 2 acts. First of all, the agreement between House Stark and House Targaryen, the Pact of Ice and Fire, drafted and signed this year between late February and March, demands that, when one's throne and territories are threatened, the other comes to their defense. As the Lannisters have attempted to usurp King Aegon's legitimate and lawful rights and his claim to the Iron Throne, House Stark is thus obliged to aid the King of the South in regaining his throne and overthrowing his enemies. The second basis of the war declaration between the Winterlands and House Lannister is their illegal and outrageous attempt to usurp the authority of the Weirwood throne. The so-called Queen Regent Cersei sent a letter demanding that King Eddard, head of House Stark and King of the Winterlands, Shield of the Realm, bend the knee to the false King Aener Targaryen and his kinslaying mother Cersei of House Lannister. They also demanded that Crown Princess Lysara and Prince Brandon be handed over as hostages, an act we have thus interpreted as death threats to His Grace the King of Winter, Her Highness the Princess and His Highness the Prince. Thus, we have no choice but to declare war and blood feud against the Lannisters of Casterly Rock. All who get in our way shall pay the price. You have been warned. Ashera Stark of House Dane, Queen Consort of the Winterlands. Tywine glowered in apoplectic fury at the paragraph announcing what his thrice-cursed daughter had so stupidly done. Many times he had resented the fact that there shared blood preventing him from killing off his shameful dwarf son. Now, however, he deeply regretted the fact that he had not smothered Cersei in her crib. If he had done so, this would not have ever happened. Flames of pain shot up his left arm, and he realized that he was breathing heavily enough that his nostrils were flaring like a horse's would. There was a tightness in his chest. He staggered to his feet, trying to breathe properly. He failed, collapsing onto all fours and cursing his daughter weakly as he succumbed to the encroaching darkness. This was all Cersei's fault. How had he managed to sire such a complete idiot for a child? At least the imp was clever, even if he was a disappointment in all other ways. Chapter 18. The Hatchlings of the Unworthy Dragon. King's Landing, the 14th of February, 187 AC. Daenerys Targaryen, daughter of Aegon IV. Do you, Prince Maron of House Nymeris Martell, take this woman as your wedded wife? The High Septon asked. Willst thou honor her, love her, protect her, comfort her and keep her, in sickness and in health, for richer and for poorer, as long as you both shall live? I will, Maron replied, smiling wildly. It was clear to anybody who looked that he was entranced by his beautiful new bride. Daenerys herself was not as happy. She had known since Daeron's ascension to the Iron Throne that her love for Daemon was futile, of course, given his birth and his marriage to Rohan, but it still stung to marry somebody else, and one who was a stranger to her and that had been an enemy to her people only a few decades past at that. Her father had promised them both that he would see her become Daemon's second wife, but Daeron had felt no need to hold to that promise, and he had too much thoughts on politics to concern himself with his sister's happiness. With her vows, there would be peace between Dorne and the Iron Throne, and any shred of possibility of her being with her half-brother would disappear. Still, her mother, what she recalled of the woman at least, had been dutiful to her husband in all matters despite her frailty. She had been a woman to be admired in spite of her delicate health, and Daenerys wished to emulate her as much as she could. Because of her recollections of her mother's advice on a princess duty, Daenerys was determined to look on the bright side. Prince Maron was a good man, from her interactions with him and from everything that Miria had told her. He had treated her very respectfully. She thought they would be able to get along, at least, and that was better than many women got in their marriages. The High Septon turned to look at her. She could feel Daemon's gaze boring into her back, but she did not dare to turn and look back at him. She did not think she would be able to find the strength to speak her vows if she did. "Do you, Princess Daenerys of House Targaryen, take this man as your wedded husband?" the Septon turned to her. "Willst thou obey him and serve him, love him, honor him and keep him, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I will," she replied softly, forcing herself to hold her chin up high. She was a princess of House Targaryen, a dragoness who was about to become a princess of House Martell. She was unbowed, unbent, and unbroken, and had fire and blood in her soul. She would not let her heartache defeat her. "Please remove the lady's maiden cloak and replace it with your own," Prince Maron the Septon ordered, once Daenerys had made her vow. Prince Maron did so, and Daenerys felt herself sway slightly when the orange cloak settled around her shoulders. It was made of silk, and quite light, but it seemed to symbolize so many things. Her wedding was the final act save for a few small things and the actual pledge that would complete the unification of Dorne and the Iron Throne. "Repeat after me together 7 times," the High Septon continued. "Father, smith, warrior, mother, maiden, crone and stranger, I am his/hers, and s/he is mine, from this day until the end of my days." They repeated the words, and then it was almost over. "Now, Prince Maron, if you would please kiss the bride and then both of you pledge your love," the Septon ordered them. Her new lord husband leaned down and gently pressed his lips against hers for an instant before he pulled back, squeezing her hand gently. She smiled shyly at him, grateful for his kindness towards her. Knowing that she was supposed to speak first, Daenerys spoke a second later. "With this kiss I pledge my love and take thee for my lord and husband," she murmured. She had ever been a quiet lady, similar to her late mother. Daenerys felt her heart sting at the knowledge that her mother was not here to guide her in her marriage. The princess gave a silent prayer that her own marriage would turn out better than her parents had, even if her husband was not the one she had wished and prayed for, as with her mother and Uncle Aemon. "With this kiss, I pledge my love and take thee for my lady and wife," Maron finished, his own voice far easier for the audience to hear. "Prince Maron and Princess Daenerys of House Nymeris Martell are now man and wife," the Septon announced. "One flesh, one heart, one soul, now and forever. Cursed be the one who comes between them." The watching crowd cheered as the Septon undid the cord, and when Daenerys looked at Daemon, she shivered slightly at the rage lurking in his eyes. She loved him, but she knew his temper well. She feared what his anger foretold for the fate of their kingdom. Underscore 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 underscore. King's Landing, the 1st of January, 189 AC. Daeron to the good Targaryen. I, Maron, head of House Martell, ruling Prince of Dorne, hereby pledge my fealty, and thus that of Dorne itself, to the Iron Throne, in the light of the 7 who are one, Daeron's good brother declared. Unlike the last time a Prince of Dorne had sworn his fealty to a King Daeron Targaryen, this time, Maron wore a broad smile as he willingly and happily pledged his country's allegiance to his good brother. Daeron himself was beaming in satisfaction and triumph. At long last, Dorne had been properly, and peacefully, brought into the fold. The conquest was nearly complete. Diplomacy and marriage had worked where military might and dragons had failed with Dawn. Quietly, though he had yet to speak of it to his advisors, or even his wife, it was Daeron's hope that he could repeat his success with the other holdout kingdom. The Winterlands were an ever-present problem, and even in peacetime, they still clashed on a regular basis at the borders or in the waters linking the Vale and the Three Sisters. There had been more than a few times during the 20 years of his father's reign that things had almost erupted into proper warfare yet again. One time, against Daeron's heavy protests, Aegon IV had gone so far as to order a fleet be built and wooden dragons be built by the pyromancers so as to invade. Thanks to the intervention of the Seven, however, they had been spared a restart to the war with the North when a vicious storm had destroyed the entire fleet and the fake dragons had collapsed in on themselves before they were even halfway through the Kingswood. The Starks had retaliated to the attempted invasion by assaulting the Gulltown port and having their Ironborn vassals attack and pillage the coasts of the Westerlands and Reach, but otherwise had let it be, thank the gods. It probably helped that Queen Rhaea had been on her deathbed at the time, and the Winterlands were transitioning from her rule to that of her nephew Bern, otherwise Daeron suspected that their retaliation would have been far more severe. Thousands of years of failure had proven that military actions would never bring the Winterlands into the fold. Maybe, as with Dawn, marriage and bribery would. But that was something for later. Right now, Daeron was accepting his good brother's pledge of allegiance. After doing so, he lifted his good friend to his feet and the two of them walked out together amidst cheers from Dornish and Midlanders alike. Together, they walked to the statue of Baelor I, who had, in his short time of ruling, forged a peace with Dawn that had later led to the marriages of Daeron to Myria and Maron to Daenerys, subsequently resulting in the ruling prince willingly and happily bending the knee. "Your work is done," Daeron and Maron said in unison, as previously agreed, looking up at the statue's face. They turned to smile and wave at the cheering crowds. Daeron sought out the eyes of his wife, seeing her standing beside his smiling sister, both of them in different stages of pregnancy and his and Myria's children surrounding them, all glowing with pride at the historical event. Underscore 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 underscore. Winterfell, the 30th of September, 208. Bern Stark 15. King Bern stared at the letter on his desk as if it were a jar filled with wildfire, liable to explode at any moment. It had not come as a complete surprise, as the Green Seers and their spies had all warned him that Daeron the Dornish lover was looking into non-militaristic ways of bringing the Winterlands into his domains. Bern was still uncertain as to how to respond without restarting a war they could ill afford at a time when they were just out of a long winter and were preparing for an outbreak of a deadly epidemic. Not to mention he was angered at the insult to his honor and that of the Starks. How dare the Southron king insult them by daring to imply he would ever spit on the sacrifices of his people, of his house, by bending the knee and giving up their ancient crown, a crown far more ancient than even old Valyria itself. Thank the gods, the man was due to die soon enough, leaving his half-brother and book-obsessed son in charge. Bern was fond of Brynden Rivers, as much as he was able to be fond of any Southron, for the man followed the gods of his mother, whom Bern deeply regretted suffering the way she had between her capture by the unworthy dragon and death, and was gods-touched. He was also, according to their spies, sensible enough to advocate against any attempts, be they military or diplomatic, towards uniting the Winterlands and the rest of their people. He jests, surely his second son and heir, Ottos, stated, staring in disbelief at the parchment. I do not believe so, Bern murmured, scratching at the side of his chin in deep thought. Bern had not expected the crown of bronze and iron to fall to him. His aunt, the late Queen Rhaea 15, had been declared barren early on in her reign, and had thus turned to her many nieces and nephews to decide on an heir. Although the succession of the Weirwood throne was very different from the way the Southrons arranged their successions, it was still uncommon for the second-born child of a 10th-born child, his father being the 5th child of the deceased King Cregan with his third wife, the late Queen Rhaenyra Stark, to ascend to the headship of the house. Yet, of all of Cregan Stark's grandchildren it had been Bern who won the trials, and thus it was Bern who was named as Rhaea's heir, taken in by her to be raised and tutored under her careful and sharp eye. She had become more of a mother to him than his own had been, due to the time he spent with her. He wondered what Rhaea would have thought, were she the one to receive such a proposal from the Southrons. He picked up the letter to reread it a third time. It had taken some time to arrive after being sent, due to his people's habit of shooting down any ravens sent in their direction from the south, and then passing through the hands of many different people to get it to Byrne himself. The Red Keep. King's Landing. The Crown Lands. The 21st of August 208. To His Grace King Byrne Stark, greetings. Your Grace, all that I have heard of the people of the Winterlands agrees that you are people who prefer to simply get down to the point, and so I shall respect that and do so without dancing around my desires. I am certain that you are well aware of my desire to have your kingdom be a part of the rest of Westeros in truth instead of simply geographically. I am sure that you have heard many things in regards to the successful unification of Dorne and the Iron Throne, some 19 years past now. Any Dornishman will inform you of the improvements to their lives since their kingdom joined with the rest of the kingdoms. Now, I would exchange that same offer to you and your people. This is my proposal. Unfortunately, my son and heiress, though married for some time to Elinor Penrose, has no children as of yet and is unlikely to have any offspring. His own heir is my grandson through my third son Rorigal, Prince Ilor. Ilor also has a twin sister, Ilora. I propose that Ilora wed your heir, Prince Artos, and then your eldest daughter, Princess Birina, would become the wife of Ilor, whom I am given to understand is quite near to her age. I would write an act of succession to ensure that Princess Birina's children inherit the Iron Throne. With the marriages, the Winterlands would come under the dominion of the Iron Throne. You would retain similar rights to those of Dorne. Whilst the Starks would no longer claim the title of Kings of Winter, you will still be labelled as princes and princesses, or an equivalent ranking title that you are welcome to choose yourself. Your house would also retain its rule of all of its current territories, and be the new Wardens of the North. Like Dorne, the Winterlands will have certain rights and privileges in regards to taxes and laws, that we shall negotiate, and you will be welcome to maintain your traditions and culture as it currently is. The only difference to the lives of your people will be that they are subject to the ruler seated on the Iron Throne also instead of just House Stark, and that you will have all of the benefits of being a part of my dominions, such as free trade between all regions and no more wars between our two peoples. I have heard that the Starks always wish to make what is the best decision for their people. I am sure that you are an intelligent man, able to see the many benefits of your kingdoms joining the rest. I look forward to hearing your response. Yours sincerely, Daeron II Targaryen, head of House Targaryen, King of the Andals, the First Men and the Rhoynar, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. You do not intend to accept, surely? Artos demanded, alarmed by the thoughtful expression on his father's face. Artos was called the Implacable for many reasons. He was also deeply in love with his betrothed, Lysara Karstark, and appalled at the thought of breaking his word in order to wed a Byrne. The nobles would revolt, and rightfully so. Byrne snapped out of his contemplation, scoffing. Certainly not, he said curtly. But I wish to refuse the offer without restarting a war. I worry about this new king beyond the wall, Raymond Redbeard, that we are starting to hear tales of from Hardham, and the Green Seers have foreseen a terrible illness that will affect not only our own kingdom but the Six Kingdoms also. We cannot deal with a two-way war. But I am not Marin Martell. I will not spit on the sacrifices of our people, of everyone who gave their lives to protect and preserve our freedom from the Burners, by giving up without a fight what they died to protect. Artos bowed his head, looking ashamed. Forgive me, my king and father, he stated. I ought not have doubted you. Byrne nodded curtly, running his fingers through the midnight-shaded fur of his direwolf, Shadow. Leave me, the king instructed his heir. And have Greenseer Blackmyra sent for. I would have her counsel on what to do next. He needed to find a way to delay things without restarting the war until the Dornish-loving dragon was dead in a few turns of the moon. After that, the matter would likely be left alone, as Aerys, from all reports, was too busy reading to care about ruling, and a God's touch would be sensible. His green-seeing chancellor would be better able to advise him on what he should do than any other. The prince rose, bowed, and left, his own direwolf Frost padding after him. Underscore 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 underscore. The neck, the 15th of October, 233 AC. Bryndon Bloodraven Rivers. Bryndon Rivers, more commonly known as Bloodraven, granted as he hacked a branch out of his way. He had been banished by his great-nephew, the new King Egon V, for his act of promising his half-brother's son, in his Blackfyr, safe passage to present his claim to the Iron Throne. However, when Innis had arrived, Bloodraven had ordered his arrest and subsequent beheading instead. Despite the consequences, Bryndon could not regret his actions. He had done what needed to be done for the good of the realm, as he had always done. He could only pray that young Egg, not so young as that, Bryndon supposed. He was married with 3 sons and 2 daughters already, could do what had to be done. To succeed as king, Egon would need to do as his Maester brother had urged him. He would have to kill the boy, and let the king emerge. Knowing how idealistic the new king was, Bloodraven had his doubts, and he feared that Egon's idealism would lead to tragedy. His great-nephew would no doubt be eager to improve the lives of the small folk among whom he had spent so much time, yet Bloodraven knew that nobility would not tolerate such reforms, and he worried how Egon would deal with it. He had never been expected to be king, after all. It was a very unfortunate and unlikely series of events that had led to the crowning of Egon V. Perhaps that would be how he was known in the history books, Egon V, the unlikely king. But Bryndon was no longer in a position to help Daeron's descendant. And his visions, always strong, were haunting him more than ever. He had been born to Egon IV's 6th mistress, Melissa Blackwood, their 3rd child. His mother had been taken captive by Egon during a skirmish at the Riverwall border, and was devoted to the gods of the forest, river and stone, scorning the 7 worshipped by the enemies of her people. In secret, she had taught her 3 children to worship her family's gods as well. It was due to her, that Bryndon had understood what he had to do when he was banished. "You are God's touched, my son," she had told him so long ago. "Albinos are living werewolves. Your dreams are messages from the gods themselves. Always follow what they tell you, for the gods will never lead you astray." Thanks to those dreams and that advice, Bryndon had spent his life successfully defending the realm. He had known where to be to kill Daemon and his twin sons at the Battle of the Redgrass Field in 196, he had spent years ruling the realm and ferreting out treason, learned of and foiled the plot to declare Daemon to Blackfyr as king, and much more besides. Now, his dreams had guided him north, to the Neck, along with his lover and half-sister, Shrasista. Thanks to Shrasiso's sorcery, his dreams, and his warging abilities, they had managed, with great difficulty, to evade the tight security of the Riverwall, and made their way to the Neck. Now, he sensed that they were almost at the end of their journey. "Bryndon Rivers," a voice, high and clear, cut through his thoughts. Shra lifted her bow as Bryndon raised his sword, preparing to fight, only to falter at the sight of the tiny woman with big blue eyes that seemed to take up half her face who had suddenly appeared before him. It was rare that people managed to do something like that, and it caught him off guard. "Who are you?" Shra demanded suspiciously. The Crange woman smiled at them, bowing in Bryndon's direction. "I am Olivia Greengood, an apprentice Greenseer. The High Greenseer saw your arrival, Bloodraven, and I was given the honor of being sent to find you. Come, God's blessed, and lover of the gods blessed. The High Greenseer awaits you. Any gods touched is welcome in these lands." Bryndon and Shra exchanged quick looks, but they had little option. It was clear that the sole reason they had learned of Olivia's presence was because she had deliberately shown herself to them. If there were others in the trees, they would not be able to detect them. They could only follow after Olivia and hope that she was not leading them into a trap. And at last gain answers to everything they had been dreaming of. Chapter 19. Choosing the Path to the Future. King's Landing, the 14th of October, 303 AC. Sir Jaime the White Lion Lannister. "Your Graces," the messenger shook with terror as he knelt before the thrones. "I come bearing grave news. The scouts have discovered that the usurper's heathen army is advancing rapidly. At the rate they are approaching, they will reach and surround King's Landing within the Senate." Ina's green eyes blazed with fury, the emerald orbs resembling wildfire. On the 3rd step of the dais, 2 steps below her brother husband and a step below her mother, one of Cersei's demands, Queen Valina flinched slightly at her lord husband's rage. The 4 and 10-year-old consort had learned the hard way of her brother's brutal nature, most especially since their marriage several moons past. "Fools," the young king exclaimed. "How worthless are my armies, that they cannot stop, or even slow an army made up of barbarians and traitors." Jaime saw Cersei clench the armrests of her throne tightly, otherwise maintaining an even, regal demeanor save for her flashing eyes. She too realized the grimness of this news. This was a disaster for their cause, which was already in tatters, especially given Lord Tywin's recent death. Already, the Winterlander fleet had blockaded the Blackwater, and were regularly launching attacks from the distance. They had also managed, several times, to get scouts inside the city and even the Red Keep itself, destroying food supplies or anything else that could be used to keep the royal family afloat during the coming siege, though for whatever reason they had not killed anybody. Once the enemy army had surrounded the land entrances, the citizens of the city would be trapped and cut off from any aid. Not that there was any more help coming. Varys had given them the news just yesterday. The reluctant Crownlander levies had all surrendered or been defeated by now, while the Riverlander army was engaged in battle with the Vale One, and the Stormlands were pinned between half of the Reach army and half of the Dornish one, the other halves having made their way to join the king they served. To cap it all off, the survivors of the Westerlands army, not quite 14,000, had already come to reinforce the capital, and due to the lack of defenses, Casterly Rock itself had fallen to the Northrons. Cersei gave a sweet smile to her eldest son, though Jaime could see beneath her mask to the fury she was concealing. "My darling boy," she cooed to Ina. "Perhaps we all ought to adjourn and confer with the small council on a plan to defeat these barbarians." Ina looked thoughtful, before nodding and rising. "Yes, mother, an excellent idea," he agreed. He turned to the guards lining the hall as the messenger slumped in relief at seemingly escaping punishment for the bad news he had given the king. "You there," he pointed at one. "Take this fool to the Black Cells. See, he is appropriately punished for this." Jaime winced as the messenger groaned in fear, babbling pleas for mercy that his nephew ignored. Stone-faced, the guard approached the messenger and lifted him, beginning to drag him out towards the side entrance. Jaime hurried over, gesturing for more to follow the royal family into the antechamber. "Release him once outside," Jaime ordered the guard in a low voice, before turning to the messenger. "You. The king is unlikely to recognize you, but once you are free, make sure to stay out of his sight anyway, just in case." "Thank you, sir," he whimpered in relief. "Thank you." Jaime gave a curt nod, squashing the guilt and shame he felt, before turning away and hastening to join his sister and her children along with the small council in the meeting chamber. "We must contrive a plan to defeat the barbarians," Ina demanded loudly, banging the table. "They must all die. Who are they, to defy me? I am a dragon, the king of the 7 kingdoms. I want them all dead." "Of course, your grace," Varys cooed. "But their numbers are strong. They outnumber us, 2 to 1, and they have blocked off the sea and destroyed most of our supplies. I fear this is a battle that we cannot win." Everyone gave Varys impressed looks, surprised by his courage. Ina jumped to his feet, infuriated. Poor Valina, who had bruises on her face and arms barely covered by her makeup and sleeves, flinched violently at the sudden movement. Jaime felt sick whenever he looked at her, thrown back in time to the reign of King Aerys and reminded of sweet Queen Rolla, how she seemed afraid to even breathe around her brother husband at times. How had Ina turned out so wrong? Jaime wanted to blame the Targaryen blood in the boy, but he feared it was a punishment from the 7 to he and Cersei, for their incest and broken vows. And now that his father, the Great Lion, was dead, there was nobody to keep the Mad Boy King in line. At least Valina and Alex were sane. It was a small comfort. "Traitor," he cried. "Traitor! How dare!" "Varys is right," nephew Jaime interrupted, diverting their attention to him. Cersei gave him a betrayed look. "We do not have enough men or resources to survive a siege. We have no other choice. I implore you, for your own sake as well as that of your wife and the babe she carries, to leave the city. We still have time before the Winterlanders arrive. We can smuggle you and your family out to safety, regroup with our allies and—" "No!" Ina screamed. "No! Only cowards like my usurping brother flee. I am no craven. If I die, I shall die fighting as king." Jaime suppressed a scoff at that. Ina probably couldn't tell the hilt of a sword from a blade. He was the most cowardly boy Jaime ever had the misfortune to meet, expecting people to surrender to him solely because of his title. "Your Grace, I beg you," Jaime began to say, only for Cersei to interrupt. "Enough, Jaime," she ordered harshly. "You know as well I do that if Ina were to flee, it would be the same as surrendering. We shall not go." "As your Grace's demand," he sighed helplessly. His eyes drifted over to Valina as the council turned their attention to strategizing. It was obvious to everybody save for the Queen Regent and King that it was a lost cause, but they tried. Alex was but a boy, Valina a frightened mother-to-be. Alex was his son, a gentle boy, and Val was his niece. She reminded him of Cersei, before their mother died and their father filled her head with a lust for the Iron Throne. The Cersei he had fallen in love with, not the woman who was before him now. Had Tywin not suffered a heart attack, they might have stood a slight chance. If anybody could have figured out a solution, it would be the greatest lord the Westerlands had ever had. But Tywin was dead, and Tyrion, who was far smarter than Jaime had ever been, was in Casterly Rock, either dead or a hostage of the Winterlanders. Jaime was the only one left who could protect his family, but it was obvious that Cersei and Ina would rather be dead than give in. That did not mean that they had to bring Val and Alex down with them. Pow-pose, pow-pose, pow-pose. That night, Jaime used the secret passages used by the Kingsguard to steal into first Alex, then Valina's rooms to wake and usher them from their beds. Thankfully, Ina was not in the habit of spending the night in his sister-wife's chambers, simply visiting her then leaving. He had not visited her bed at all since she announced her pregnancy. "Uncle Jaime," she murmured sleepily once he had shaken her awake as gently as he could. "What are you?" "Shush," he urged her, pressing a finger to his lips. She blinked awake properly, nodding silently and shooting an anxious look at the door. Jaime knew that in the outer chamber, at least two of her ladies would be sleeping, ready to assist their royal mistress should she require anything during the night. "Take these and dress quickly," he instructed her quietly, holding out a long wool dress, like those worn by the commons of King's Landing, as well as a pair of thick boots and a long black cloak. Jaime himself was dressed as a merchant, his sword hidden by his cloak and a sheath made of leather instead of the metal most knights had their sheaths made of. Alex too had received commoner's clothing to disguise himself. Jaime could only pray it would be enough. Val obeyed him silently, stepping behind the changing screen to pull on the dress before exiting again and following him into the passageway. "Uncle, what is happening?" she pressed once they were inside the passage. Jaime lifted the torch out of its holder and began leading the way. Once, Val's voice would have been petulant and demanding, but the months since her father's death had changed the girl. Gone was the spoiled but sweet-natured girl she had once been, replaced by a solemn young woman who was soon to be a mother, 7 willing. "We are leaving," Jaime sighed. "There is no way to survive this. Aegon has too much support, both within and without the kingdoms. The 3 of us shall flee the capital tonight, and as soon as we reach an unblockaded port, we will sail for safety in the free cities." "But what of the throne?" Alex inquired. He too had matured, though he remained painfully shy, not to mention being rather round and clumsy. His cat, Vigor, was clutched tightly to his chest. "Are we going to the free cities so that Val can bear the heir to the Iron Throne in safety?" "My child is not heir to anything," Alex. Val sighed, one hand pressed against her stomach. "Aegon is the rightful king, everyone knows it is true. I am more concerned with Mother. Will she be joining us?" Jaime sighed, shoulders slumping. He stopped walking and turned to the pair. "Your mother is determined to remain with Ina until the very end," he informed them glumly, making their eyes shine with unshed tears. "And he will not leave, as he has stated. But she desires the safety of her children above all. She pretended to dismiss my suggestion earlier to disguise our intentions of having the 2 of you smuggled to safety. She sends her love and the blessings of the gods to the both of you." It was a small white lie, in Jaime's opinion. He was sure that, were Cersei not so distraught by their father's sudden death and the chaos of the past few moons, she would have agreed with his suggestion. Before this, the safety and happiness of her children was her top priority, above even the Iron Throne. At least, that was what Jaime believed. Sometimes he had his doubts, but he had to believe that much about her, at least. She was his sister, the love of his life, his other half, his soulmate. He had to believe the best of her, because everyone else believed the worst. "Come along now," he said then, straightening and turning to continue leading the way. This particular passage would take them to near the mud gate. They would have to go on foot, but masses of people were fleeing the city, and the gates had not yet been shut, as Lord Valerian had pointed out that the more citizens who left, the less people they had to feed. Jaime and his children would escape in the mass of peasants all desperate to escape the doomed capital. All they had to do was get there safely. Underscore 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 underscore. The Kingswood, the 14th of October, 303 AC. Oberyn. "We have things to discuss," my Princess Oberyn breathed into Sara's ear. They were naked and sweaty, having just completed a blissful session of love-making, and she was wrapped in his embrace, her chestnut curls spread over his chest as her fingers idly traced his scars. It somehow felt more intimate than the actual sex. "Oh," she asked idly, her grey gaze fixed on a scar he'd received fighting for the Second Sons whilst travelling the Free Cities. It was an interesting one, admittedly. The Dothraki had some strange weapons, and that particular scar had come from a curved sword, leaving a raised, twisting mark on his chest, the opposite side to his heart. He had barely survived, even though the wound itself had not been too deep. Despite that, only the intervention of some Volanten healer had saved him. "What matters must we speak of, my snake?" "What will happen after the war is over?" he replied steadily. She paused in the middle of her tracing, but at least this time, unlike all of the other times, she didn't refuse outright to discuss the matter. "We cannot continue to put off making our decisions, and soon we will have captured King's Landing. After that, like as not we will be too busy to talk. You are well aware of this." "I am," she admitted. "What is your wish for after the war?" She refused to meet his gaze, but she didn't leave either, and Oberyn found hope in that fact. "I wish to return with you to Winterfell," he answered, twisting a lock of brunette hair around his finger. "With my daughters. I think they would be happy in the Winterlands, where women are as free as men. I want to help raise Maria. I have missed so much of her life already." He kept any hint of accusation or anger from his voice, but Sara tensed anyway. He stroked her bare back, his own fingers grazing the various scars that littered her form and that he had become intimately familiar with over the past few moons. She had gained more than a few in between Braavos and his party's arrival in the stronghold of the Starks. Most Southron men would have been repulsed by scars marring a woman's body, but Oberyn could only revel in the proof of her strength. "I wish to be with you," he added finally. "The kings put clauses into the pact, as I am sure you recall, to trade ambassadors, as our courts do with the Free Cities. I would volunteer for that post. Even if you wish to end our relationship, I will still do so, to be with Maria." She sighed, finally meeting his dark eyes with her own. The storm that raged within them entranced him every time they locked eyes with one another. "I do not wish to end our relationship," she admitted. He couldn't have stopped the pleased smile he gained if he had wanted to. "But I cannot marry you, if that is your desire," she warned him. "I am betrothed, and Edarion is a good man. We are not in love, but I will not bring shame on everybody involved by ending the betrothal, and my people would never accept a burner as my consort either." "Would they accept me as your lover?" he replied evenly. He hated to contemplate the possibility of sharing her. He had always been a possessive man, and although he'd partaken of multiple lovers at once before and found great enjoyment in such, the thought of doing such with Sara was unappealing, to say the least. "Our children could never be in line for the Weirwood throne, save if everybody else in the line of succession, including my siblings and their own future children, were all dead or incapable of bearing heirs," she stated frankly. "And there must never be a hint of favoritism towards the South, nor a whisper that any child I bear, or I myself, has begun worshipping your seven. But so long as you do not attempt to influence us in favor of the South, at least more than the position of ambassador would require, I believe they would accept it. My mother has been working on our behalf for such, and she writes that her efforts have borne fruit." He smiled in pleasure. "That, I am glad to do," he replied without hesitation. "I would convert to your religion, if it betters my odds of being able to stay with you and our daughter." She gave him a stunned look, that swiftly softened into a rare look of tenderness. "Truly," she inquired, "you would convert?" "Just for Maria and I." "I have never cared much for the seven," he replied, hoping his sincerity showed to her. "They have never given me much reason to believe in them. My devotion to you and our child is far stronger than my devotion to them." She stared at him for several long seconds, before lunging forward and pressing her lips against his, pouring all the love and devotion that all of her training to maintain her emotional distance prevented her from saying aloud to him. He willingly kissed her back, and they proceeded to show each other the love neither of them were easily able to bring themselves to openly admit the best way they could. Underscore 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 underscore. Winterfell, the 16th of October, 303 AC. Paladin Arthur, the Sword of Morning Dane. "My king, I would speak with you," Arthur stated, kneeling before his monarch and good brother. King Eddard surveyed him with knowing eyes, waving to grant him leave to speak. "Speak then, my loyal paladin," he instructed the silver-haired man. "What weighs upon your mind?" "I think that I can guess at it." Arthur inhaled and exhaled, daring to meet his king's eyes. He had a deep friendship with the man, one that dated back to long before the king had even met Arthur's sister, let alone passed the trials and become heir and then king of the Winterlands. It was a connection that gave Arthur many liberties, but it was that same connection that was causing guilt to twist his stomach into knots. The Greenseer he had consulted, Greenseer Wolfield, had assured him that he could find great joy if he were to follow this path, but a large part of him left as if he were betraying his sworn liege and brother. "Ashoyles," he began formally. "I am aware that, once the usurping lions have been defeated, you will be sending an ambassador to the Southron capital to live there and be a bridge between our two peoples. I wish to request to be the one to take up the post." Eddard surveyed him with an impenetrable expression. "Why?" he asked simply. Arthur exhaled again, looking down. "I would, if she would have me, request the hand of the Queen Mother Elia in marriage." The king's expression remained even, showing no hint of his thoughts or opinion on the match. "Why?" he repeated. "I love her, my king," Arthur confessed. "In a way I have not loved anybody since Lina's death. I want to wed her, but I cannot ask her to leave her children behind, and I would be fearful of her health, if she remained too long in our climate." A familiar pang stung his heart when he mentioned Lina, but it was duller than it used to be. Lina, spearwife of the Giantsbane Free Folk clan, had been his betrothed, lost to him in a shivers epidemic before his eldest niece's birth. Gentle, frail of health, Elia was the opposite of the fierce warrior women in every possible way. From personality to looks, Lina had been blessed by fire, with crimson curls cut to her shoulders and done in a dozen braids paired with pale skin, calloused hands and fierce eyes the color of the sea, yet she soothed him. Her sweet nature brought a feeling of peace to him that he had never felt before in his memory, just by being with her, and he had swiftly become addicted to the feeling. Eddard the king softened into Ned the friend and brother, and he stood, coming closer to clap Arthur on his shoulder. The Cranot and children blood that flowed through the Starks' veins several times over meant that, despite their imposing presence, the Starks were a terribly short family, and so he had to tilt his head back to meet Arthur's eyes and reach up to reach his shoulder when so close. From any other, it might have appeared amusing, but the Starks were not so. "Then wed the lady with my blessing and best wishes, brother," he urged. "For you have well earned this blessing from the gods. I pray you and she live a long, happy life together." "Thank you, brother," Arthur replied, kneeling to receive his liege's blessing. Then, heartened, he went to seek out the Queen Mother of the South, to lay his heart before her and ask her to accept it, and entrust him with her own. Chapter 20. The Union of the Sun and Sword. Winterfell, the 16th of October, 303 AC. Elia. Elia started in surprise when the knock came. Then she relaxed, recognizing the rhythm. "Just a moment, please," she called, rising to her feet and readying the knot on her dressing gown. She checked herself in the looking glass, deciding that she was as well dressed as she could be given she had been spending the day reading before the fire in her rooms and had no maid with her to help her change, nor did she wish to leave Paladin Dane waiting so long. Hoping that he would not be displeased that she was dressed in her nightgown and robe, a pair of fur-lined slippers covering her stockinged feet, she hastened to the door, pulling it open to reveal the patiently waiting man. The two guards, previously sailors assigned to Oberyn's ship, Sir Garlon had stayed behind to be their king's guard whilst the other knights went to war with their king, but it was more important that he protect Margaery and Daeron than Elia, and so Elia was protected by the Dornishmen who'd bravely taken them to safety, were there as well. At this point, he had spent so much time with her, they were as unconcerned by his presence as she was. Elia Arthur said her name in his thick Northron accent, the deep voice sending pleasurable shiver down her spine. If you would grant me leave, I would speak with you, without others. She smiled at him, quietly hoping that he retained his accent and slight difficulty with Andai. He had been quick to gain fluency in her native tongue, but he still had a certain way of speaking that she found strangely attractive. Of course she agreed. Would you like to come in? Yes, please, he nodded, following her inside. I have some tea brewing, she offered. Would you like a cup? No, thank you, he shook his head. I wish to speak with you immediately. I cannot wait. She felt a bolt of alarm, worried that he had received bad news from the front. He showed no grimness, but she thought he seemed a bit nervous beneath his Northron stoicism. Is everything well? She asked anxiously. Has there been news from the army? He insistently shook his head, reaching out to rest a hand on her arm in comfort. Near here, no, he denied. Forgive me, I did not intend to distress you. I have a question for you, and I cannot bring myself to wait. Elia relaxed in relief. Oh, forgive me for overreacting, please, she apologized, Arthur dismissing it immediately. There is nothing to be forgiven, he assured her. He hesitated, then went before her onto one knee, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a beautiful silver ring with a jewel on top it, cut into the shape of a 7-point star. It was a moonstone, she recalled. A rare gem in the south, but House Dane apparently had their seat on a mine of it. I am unsure how this is done for your people, he admitted, tone apologetic. But in my culture, when a man seeks the hand of a lady, he goes before on his knees and offers her a ring. The kneeling is to show his deep desire, and the ring symbolizes eternity. Elia felt her breath catch. One hand covered her mouth as Arthur took the other, pressing a reverent kiss to her fingertips. Rhaegar had never treated her in such a manner, as if she were the most precious treasure he had ever been gifted with. I have been granted leave by my king to take up the position of ambassador to the south, Arthur informed her. So if you honor my request, you would not need to leave your children behind. I vow, I would never shame or harm you. I would stand between you and all threats, defend and love you as the blessing from the gods that you are. You are as your house's emblem, the sun of my world now. I cannot be worthy of a woman as mighty and strong, as beautiful as you, yet I would seek every day for the rest of our lives to be so. And so I dare to come before you on my knees and beg for your favor and acceptance of my heart's greatest desire. Elia Targaryen, of House Martell, Queen Mother of the Six Kingdoms and Princess of Dawn, he continued, staring up at her as if he was a Septon and she were the maiden come before him. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I cannot bear you any children, she warned him. Her eyes swam with tears, and she longed with all her heart to accept immediately, but she could not deceive him. A wife's primary duty was to give her lord husband sons and daughters, and that was not something she could do. He shook his head, expression of love and adoration unchanged by her confession. I have raised my nephew as my own son, he replied. Have helped raise and teach my sister's children. I need no children from you. What I seek is your heart, for I have given mine to you. You have my heart already, she told him, her tears spilling onto her cheeks as she reveled in the love this man, who held her hand so gently yet was the most fearsome of warriors, gave her. She had never been treasured in such a way, and she could have died happy right there, so long as he kept looking at her that way. So you will marry me? He asked hopefully. Yes, she breathed. Yes. He jumped to his feet, and pulled her into a passionate kiss. She returned it, not even caring when she lost her breath, for how could she feel anything but delight when she was being bathed in the love of the best man she had ever been graced to meet. In that minute, she believed him when he called her the sun, for how else would she be able to glow the way she was? underscore 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 underscore. Outskirts of King's Landing, the 21st of October, 303 AC. Arila could not help but study the crownless dragon intently. Inwardly, she smirked as he tried valiantly to hide his discomfort. His guard, one of the men in those ridiculously impractical white cloaks, was not so successful. She wondered if it was her staring unblinkingly at him that unnerved him, or if it was her appearance. She had inherited thick black curls from her Blackwood mother, but her left eye was blood red, as had been the case for her father and his three sisters, their mother, grandfather and great-grandfather, ever since their house's founding. The right eye was a blue-tinted purple in her case. Her young house had never been large, and she was almost all that remained of it now, after losing 3 siblings to the recent White War and 1 to a fever in childhood. Her cousins were all members of their father's houses, sharing no features or skills with her own. She was a greenseer, not a warrior, and she would not have come to the warfront had she not been so curious about the dragons and what they were like in person. After all, in another, far different life, she might have been raised as their kin. My Lawa, good green woman. The crownless gave her an uncomfortable smile, stumbling over the correct address. Might I aid you in some manner? She tilted her head thoughtfully. I am Arila. She introduced herself at last. Her Andai was far better than that of most of her people. She barely had an accent. Of House Ravenstar. I am the twice-great-granddaughter of the one you call Bloodraven and his lover Shrasista. I came to lay eyes on the land they were born and raised in, and the descendants of the kin that betrayed them. Around them, most people were going about setting up the camp for the siege. They surrounded the capital city of the south and everyone was determinedly ignoring the disgusting smell of shit that was carried to them by the wind, though more than a few pointed comments were made in the hearing of the Southrons, pointing out the superior layout of Winter City and its sewer system. No one bothered to pay attention to the stunned young king claimant, or his equally shocked guard. You stun me, my Magnra Egon, the crownless finally croaked out. We had thought Bloodraven and his sister went to Essos after their banishment. No, Arila shook her head. She wore her curls loose, with several thin braids with beads woven into the locks. She felt the beads, carved and painted by her late elder sister Melissa as a present the day she left to begin training as a greenseer, bat against her cheeks, briefly staining them red. Bloodraven is an albino, and thus blessed by the gods of the forest, river and stone. His mother was kidnapped by Egon the rapist, and she raised him to worship our gods in secret. She knew that it would be vital for him, for albinos are humanoid weirwood trees. He saw that he must come north. Shra followed him out of love. She had magic in her veins through her Lysan mother, and so the Greenseers agreed to train her also. When their training was done, they had a son, Daeron. He was my great-grandfather. So you see, I am kin to you, and I wished to see whether or not you are worthy of Bloodraven's belief in you. You speak as if the man still lives, the White Cloak scoffed, though he still looked pale and anxious. Arila turned her gaze to him, hiding a smirk at the way he shifted in discomfort at her eyes. He does, she stated serenely. Impossible, the guard, who was beginning to annoy her, the same way a cricket that wouldn't stop chirruping annoyed a person, blurted out. The man was born in 175, for the love of the gods. He'd be well over 100 by now, were he still alive. Indeed, Arila hummed. You do know how to do sums, after all. I am impressed. I had not believed you had so much ability to think. He looked deeply offended, but she ignored him and went on. Grandfather has seen 128 namadays. How can he still be alive then? Her distant cousin asked, shocked. Is that a common age for Winterlanders to live to? Arila scoffed at that. Of course 'tisn't he, she sniffed disdainfully, her Winterlander side amused by his blatant embarrassment at the stupidity of his question. In fact, because of our harsh lives, we tend to live shorter lives than you Southrons do. But grandfather is a god's touched, a vessel for the gods. They will keep him alive as long as they require him. Though, his health has begun to fade these past few years. She could not keep her sorrow out of her expression and tone as she made that admission. He served as High Greenseer for the latter part of King Bern's reign, all the way through to King Eddard's reign. 'Twas only a few years past that he retired as advisor to the king, after the end of the most recent White War. Now he lives in Wintershold on the Isle of Faces, which is the headquarters of the Greenseers, where we go to train and such. I see, Egon murmured. He hesitated before offering tentatively. If it would be possible, I would dearly like to meet my distant uncle. I know that history becomes more and more distorted over the years. I would like to hear the truth from someone who lived it. Arilla smiled approvingly at him. When the war has ended, she replied. I will take you to the Isle, where you might meet grandfather. He will be pleased to see you. I think he wishes to make amends with the last of his kin before joining grandmother in Valhalla. I look forward to it, was the Southron King's sincere reply. Chapter 21. Visions of Fire. King's Landing, the 22nd of October, 303 AC. Cersei. Cersei couldn't believe it, even now. Jaime had abandoned her in her hour of need, left her behind and run away like a coward, abandoning his oaths as a Kingsguard and those as a brother and lover to protect her. Not only that, but he had stolen away her children as well. It made her blood burn with rage to recall his treason, but she forced herself not to think of it. Their last stand was what she had to be focused on. Most of the rabble had fled in the week between Jaime abandoning her and the arrival of the barbarians' army, the fearful, insignificant ants scurrying away in fear of the Winterland's legendary wrath. However, the gates had all been shut when a scout had warned that the army was on their doorstep. King's Landing was so full of citizens, and with the port blocked for so long, there were still the best part of 3 million people within, though most of that number was made up of the small folk. Cersei was unconcerned with the peasants, of course. She wasn't Elia, with the weak woman's soft heart. She had always scorned her husband's first wife and how she showered charity on the small folk. If it had been to gain support for her son, Cersei could have understood it more, though she still sneered at the thought of needing support from peasants. But no, Elia gave out arms because she truly cared for the sheep. It made Cersei scoff in contempt at the older woman's weakness. Things like that were why men thought so little of their gender. The commons existed solely to serve their betters, or die for them in wars such as this one. And Cersei hardly cared at all for the fate of the treasonous nobility either, at this point. In fact, she and Ina had been forced to throw many a noble into the dungeons or have them executed, when they had dared to suggest surrendering to the heathens, or even go so far as to whisper that her son's actions resembled those of his paternal grandfather. How dare anyone compare her son, born of the dragons and lions, the greatest houses in the world, to Aerys the Mad? The mere thought enraged her. Unless they took drastic measures, their cause was hopeless. Cersei knew it as well as everyone else. Despite what her gender caused people to assume, she was an intelligent woman, a shrewd ruler, never mind what her father said. He'd been ailing from his illness already, else he'd have supported her actions. His illness had affected his mind, she knew it. She'd made the right decisions, he had just been too sick to see the truth of that. Had archaic laws not prevented it, Cersei would have ruled the Rock better than Jaime, and certainly better than the imp could ever have managed. But she'd been a girl, and so relegated to birthing heirs with Lannister blood instead. Not that she would ever be able to regret any of her golden children, but she still raged at the injustice of it all. At least they would be able to bring her blasted stepson and his army of heathens down with them. Cersei felt her rouge-painted lips curve into a dark smirk at the thought. Lord Hallin, she greeted the newly arrived Grand Master of the Alchemist's Guild. The pallid man greeted her with a jerky bow, accepting her delicate hand into his own sweaty one to press his dry and chapped lips against her smooth skin. She hid her irritation, bolstering herself with the reminder of the benefits of dealing with the man. Your Grace, Hallin murmured respectfully. Thank you for responding so promptly to my note. She waved him off gracefully. His Grace my son and I take a keen interest in the guild, she promised him. And its work most of all. Is the project we assigned you prepared? It is, Your Grace, Hallin confirmed, his thin lips curving into a smile. The caches are ready, and our most trusted acolytes and servants have placed them all. Nobody will say anything. Cersei demanded sharply. She had ordered the preparations be made in utmost secrecy, so that the tree-worshipping heretics would be unable to come up with a way to avoid the flames that would engulf the city on Cersei's order. The Red Keep would be safe, however. She had been firm when ordering that. Everything would be placed at a distance from the Red Keep, between the gates and the 3 hills. She and her son would watch in glee as the attackers burned to death in wildfire in the midst of their would-be triumph. Then, once they had defeated the enemy invaders, they would deal with her blasted stepdaughter, hiding away in the Eyrie. A faceless man would probably be the best solution to the problem of eliminating Rhaenys and her spawn. Then they would be able to find Jaime and her younger children, Valina would birth Ina's heir, and everything would be as it should be. She would, of course, aid her inexperienced son in ruling, and claim the rock from the imp, with Ilex taking up the Lannister name and becoming heir to the Westerlands. Everything would be perfect. Cersei listened to Hallin swear to the 7 above that all of those charged with placing the caches were unaware of the truth of their missions and were sworn to secrecy on what they did know, and she smiled. Underscore 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 underscore. Outskirts of King's Landing, the 22nd of October, 303 AC. Olivia Greengood. Olivia Greengood was a strong Greenseer. She was a Crange woman and the green side ran strongly in her family, on both sides. She was the distant granddaughter of High Greenseer Greengood, the Greenseer who had served Torren the Defiant, and also of Greenseer Black Mayor, who had been the High Greenseer during King Bern's reign, and they were not the only ones of her ancestors who had held that exalted position. It was likely that she would one day hold it herself too. Because of her strong sight and control, she had received the honor of being assigned as the leader of the Greenseers who had come south with Princess Lysara for the war, of which there were 5. To the Andals, the most sacred number was 7, to represent their 7 who are one. For the first men, the most sacred number was 5. It had taken 5 days for the world to be formed by the gods, there were 5 aspects of the spirit, and so on, so forth. It took 5 Greenseers to form a seeing circle, which was what the group was currently doing, so as to see the possible outcomes of the siege, and determine the way to victory with the least amount of death. A seeing circle was, as previously mentioned, made up of 5 Greenseers melding their powers so that the leader of the circle would be able to see as strongly as possible, and direct the vision to a point. Some were even able to interact with their visions to a certain extent. "Is everyone ready?" Olivia inquired, glancing at her 4 companions. There were 2 men and, counting her, 3 women. Like her, they were all Crannog men. The 2 males of the group were Greenseers Hojan Reed, heir to the High Greenseer, and Doran Fenn. Hojan was 7 and 10, a close friend to Prince Brandon and his good brother-to-be, while Doran was a grizzled man of 5 and 40, but as spry as ever. He had the honor of being 1 in 1,000 Greenseers who was also a skin changer. His warg familiar, a hawk he called Opal, was perched on his shoulder. Her female companions were Jessa of House Peat, a girl Princess Arya's age with curly yellow hair and deep red eyes that shocked the Southrons whenever they saw them. Several fools had even whispered she was a demon of some sort. In fact, Jessa was a descendant of Brynden the Bloodraven and Shra the Star of the Sea's granddaughter, and her red eyes and green seeing abilities were from that line. Lastly, there was Aerila Ravenstar, Jessa's cousin and the heiress of House Ravenstar. Her widowed father was the head. She was the one holding the weirwood paste they needed for the ceremony. Yes, they all agreed. Then we shall begin, Olivia declared, everyone kneeling in the dirt and Aerila putting the bowl of paste in the center. It would have been better if they were in a godswood, but there were none in the south beyond the river wall. They'd all been converted into perfumed gardens, their heart trees cut down and weirwoods burned down. It made Olivia shudder in horror to think of such a terrible sin being committed, though of course what else could be expected from Andals. The crownless promise to have a godswood planted in King's Landing was a small comfort. She prayed the Southrons would follow their king's lead. They did not have to give up their own 7, but planting weirwoods would spread the true faith, and that was something every pious first man desired. While her companions chanted the required intonation in the old tongue, Olivia reached out and scooped up some weirwood paste with her fingers, bringing it to her mouth and swallowing quickly, forcing herself not to gag in disgust at the foul taste. As she ingested the mixture, she prayed mentally to the gods. "O great gods of the forest, river, and stone, I do beseech you all," she thought. Show me what we must do to conquer King's Landing, sparing as many lives as can be. A second later, she was slumping to the ground, unconscious, as she succumbed to the visions the gods sent to her. There were 1,000 different time streams, many showing their victory. But there were many others, too. Horrific scenes of green fire engulfing the capital, spreading out of control regardless of desperate attempts to quell the flames and killing anyone, defender, attacker or innocent, in its path. No matter what fate met the army, the Winterlands fought back and subdued the lions, yet the damage incurred by the deaths of thousands of Winterlander and Southron soldiers, including the Crown Princess of the North, the King of the South and a Prince of Dawn, had grave consequences for both kingdoms. In most of those futures, their fragile new alliance crumbled due to the distrust between the two peoples, and the grief over the losses. Olivia cried out, horrified, as she watched the terrible sights, particularly the one that she saw in its entirety, the path most likely to occur. The fire shone brightly in the night. Screams and yells could be heard, as could sobs and coughs. Nobody could tell the difference between defender or attacker, for both sides were united in their horror at the inferno destroying the 300-year-old city. It seemed that the defenders had not been warned of their king's terrible plot. A figure staggered across the street. The person's gender and their origin couldn't be discovered, for they were engulfed in wildfire. A blazing trail followed in their wake. They sobbed, collapsing to their knees and seizing in agony. One brave archer fired at the poor soul, the arrow going straight through their chest and ending their suffering, though the flames continued to spread. What is this? Princess Lysara demanded of the panicked King Egon, her grey eyes wide as she, Prince Oberyn, Egon and his guard, Sir Barristan, crouched near to the ground, attempting to avoid breathing in any smoke. The princess guard, the grit of the free folk, was dead already, pushing her princess out of the way of a section of wall that had collapsed from the flames. She was one of many lost Winterlander soldiers. The princess had tears in her eyes that were only partially from the smoke, and a small portion at that. What have those lunatics done? It's wildfire. Egon cried back, his eyes wide. By the gods, they are truly mad. Do they not understand what they have done? How do we put it out? The princess cried, ducking a jet of green fire that flew disconcertingly close to her head. The water will not affect it. We can't. Prince Oberyn exclaimed. Wildfire is created by the alchemist's guild, through some form of magic. It burns everything it touches, only time will end it. Any attempts to smother the blaze will only feed it. We must fall back, your graces. Sir Barristan urged. The city is lost, we must go. These are my people. Egon argued back. I cannot abandon them all to die. They are dead already. His uncle snapped back, looking around. We must retreat, or all of us and our forces are lost too. The princess settled the matter. Retreat. She yelled, coughing as she inhaled some smoke. Retreat. She pounded her hip drum, signaling the order to fall back, not that many hadn't already started to fall back already. But both the city and the army were in chaos as everyone tried to flee, people being trampled carelessly, or shoved aside into the flames as people sacrificed strangers to try and save themselves and their loved ones. The group of royals fell back as best they could, only to end up pinned in a street, wildfire surrounding them. We are lost, the princess declared grimly. Her shoulders slumped and she made a triquetra with her finger, whispering a prayer. Gods guide us to the next world, Lysara sighed resignedly. She unsheathed her dagger and braced the tip of the weapon against her throat. Sara, no, Prince Oberyn began to object. She silenced him with a kiss. I am glad this happened, that I might have been given more time with you, my love, she murmured. We are lost, you know it as well as I do. Better a quick, painless death than a slow, agonizing one, no. He closed his eyes tightly shut and pulled her into his arms, putting his own dagger to his neck. King Egon and Sir Barristan too prepared to copy the lover's actions. Still locked in a kiss, the princess and prince slit their own throats together, as the Southron king too took his own life, his faithful guard copying the act not a full second later. Moments later, the green fire finally reached them, engulfing their bodies in flame and creating a ball of fire that took out the entire section of wall the group had ended up pinned against. No, Olivia wept as she watched the terrible scene shift to show the Starks receiving word of the massacre, The Southron queens both collapsing in grief, and little Magnra Maria crying for her mother and father as King Eddard vowed vengeance for his eldest daughter and nephew's deaths. No. This cannot be. This must not be. Help me, guide me, please gods. Let me stop it. How can I stop this horror? Please. More visions flashed across her vision, and when her eyes snapped open, Olivia understood what had to be done to win the war. Well? Doran asked gruffly. What did you see? You are panting, catch your breath, my friend, Jessa urged. What's wrong, what happened? Erila pressed, brow wrinkled in concern. Olivia trembled. Her face was clammy, and her breath came in gasps. It felt as if she had been burning with her princess and people. She could smell the awful stench of flesh burning, feel the fire licking at her skin and the smoke filling her lungs. She shuddered, trying to regain her sense of self and reality. That was the problem with circle visions. They were so realistic, it was as if you were actually living out the scenes you dreamt. Olivia? Hojan asked concernedly. What did you see? Unless I speak to Her Highness immediately, catastrophe, Olivia stated, tone grim, having finally regained her senses, though a strong sense of urgency burned within her. She scrambled to her feet, her braid beating against the small of her back as she raced towards the command tent, her companions on her heels. Chapter 22. Capturing the Castle. The Red Keep, the 23rd of October, 303 AC. Sara. This way, Egon murmured in a low tone, turning to the right fork of the crossroads they had come to. Everyone from the south had been appalled by the Green Seer's announcement that the Lions had hidden caches of something called wildfire all throughout King's Landing in an attempt to destroy the besieging army. Appalled and panicked. Sara's people had not understood their reactions, at first. What was so frightening about this fire? They were, after all, right beside a bay full of water that they could use to douse the blaze. Then the Southrons had explained what wildfire was, that it mimicked dragon fire and would burn until it doused itself, that even a river of water would only increase its intensity, not dampen it. That had been horrifying to hear. Sara wondered why none of the Targaryens had ever used it against her people in one of their many wars against each other, and Egon had explained that it had been invented late in his grandson, Aerys the Mad's reign. It seemed that the Lioness couldn't even be original, as she had taken the idea from Aerys. The difference was that Aerys had never gotten the chance to actually have the wildfire he planned to use to turn into a dragon created. Rhaegar had staged his coup and locked his father away in Dragonstone before the Mad King had gotten the chance to go through with his insane plan. Thankfully, Olivia had had the sense to search for a way around the deadly trap, and informed them that, to win the war and prevent Cersei and Ina from having the pyromancers unleash the deadly inferno, they would have to use a sneak attack. Some of the Southrons had grumbled about cowardice and honor, but none of them had been able to refute Robb's point that at least if they were alive they'd be able to regain their precious honor, and a painful death via burning in a fire along with everyone else in the city that they allowed to ignite would destroy their honor and leave it that way. Now, there they were, a small group made up of both Southrons and Northrons, sneaking into the Red Keep via one of the many secret passages installed by Maegor the Cruel. Personally, Sara thought that the Red Keep ought to be burned to the ground and rebuilt. The current castle was surely cursed, given that Maegor had ordered its builders murdered after they had completed their tasks. Maybe that contributed to the Targaryens' insanity as well as their arrogant claims of being exceptions to the gods' laws and their incest. Another group, larger and led by General Umber and Sir Something Arryn, Egon's good brother, had also used the passageways to get inside the city, but their task was to get into the wall barracks and seize control of the gates, opening them to allow the Winterlander army to enter unhindered by the City Watch and Westerland's reinforcements. But that was irrelevant right now. What was relevant was that they were about to sneak into the keep and seize control of it from the inside. From Olivia's visions, only Cersei, Ina, and the leaders of the Alchemists Guild knew about the wildfire. The rest of the guild had been given excuses, and were unlikely to support the act, given that going through with it would mean their own deaths as well. As such, they needed to capture the leaders themselves, and then the rest of the defending army would lay down arms, or if they fought, they wouldn't know of the wildfire nor would they go to ignite it. Capture Cersei, Ina and Hollin, and they would win the war. These tunnels are like a maze, Robb grumbled in complaint, clutching his sword tightly. What lunatic came up with the idea for them? Not even Winterfell has such a complicated system. That was true, but there were, however, at least one passage in nearly every room, and at irregular intervals in the halls. It had been attacked, burned and rebuilt more times than could be counted throughout the many millennia since Brandon the Builder had raised the original keep, and every time it was renovated more passages were added to give the residents ways to escape. Some had been forgotten, and not all of the known ones were usable, of course, but enough were to be useful, and the secrets of their locations were known only to the members of the main house and to the Warg warriors, to maintain the integrity of the passages. They were built by Maegor the Cruel, the Conqueror's youngest son. Aegon explained lowly. He suffered from the madness that plagues my family, and ordered the keep be riddled with passages, so as to be able to escape any assassins. Not even my family know more than a handful of them. Where does this one lead? Sara inquired softly. She knew it led deep into what they called Maegor's Holdfast, but not the exact location of their exit. To the royal apartments. This time it was Ser Barristan who answered. We will come out of the wall in the king's bedchamber. It is late, Oberyn added. Like as not, Ina will be abed and we can capture him with ease. It would have to be a capture, if possible. Insane and hated he may have been, but Ina was still Aegon's blood, and they wanted to avoid him being tainted with the label of Kinslayer. If necessary, however, they would do what had to be done. We must not become overconfident, Paladin Mage Mormont warned. Arrogance has killed more warriors than any blade ever could. Indeed, you are correct, Paladin Sara's lover acknowledged. We're nearly there, Aegon announced. Just around the next corner, at the bottom. Sara inhaled and exhaled deeply, centering herself and preparing for battle. They had been forced to leave the wolves behind, as they were too large to fit in the tunnels, and she felt bereft without Type's reassuring presence at her side. Oberyn swooped down to give a quick but passionate kiss, before pulling away and adjusting his grip on his spear. She felt a small smile flicker across her face. She had come to terms with and accepted her love for him, and now there was a peace in her that she had not felt before. She glanced around, taking in the small group quickly. Herself, Robb, Oberyn, Aegon, Ser Barristan and Oswell, and Paladins Mage Mormont and Serena Whitewolf, Mage's loyal apprentice. Everyone was doing some last-minute checks as they ensured everything was ready and their weapons were sharp. The wait was over. They had arrived at the entrance. Underscore 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 underscore. Aegon. The death of the falsely proclaimed King of the Seven Kingdoms did not take long. Ina had been fast asleep in bed when they sneaked into his bedchamber as quiet as mice. He screamed loudly for the guards when Aegon put his sword to his neck and whispered for him to wake up, little brother. The false white cloaks guarding his doorway had come rushing in, but quickly been taken out by Aegon's uncle and Ser Barristan. Meanwhile, the rest of them had been occupied securing Ina, though things had not turned out as they hoped. Ina, despite his cowardice, had fought back on instinct. Paladin Whitewolf had reacted first, having been closest to Aegon's side when Ina had lunged at him wildly with a dagger. Its hilt was very gaudy, made of gold in the form of a roaring lion with glinting ruby eyes. No doubt the Winterlanders were sneering at the useless, ostentatious nature of it. Perhaps they had rubbed off on him more than he had realized, because Aegon was exasperated by the thing also. Despite his lack of skill, Ina would very likely have successfully managed to kill Aegon, striking him right in the back of his unguarded neck when he turned away for a moment to speak with Princess Lysara, if not for the Paladin's intervention. As it was, Paladin Whitewolf spotted his brother's actions, and she intercepted the attack with her sword, disarming Ina with one swift movement and then, before anybody could react, shoved her weapon deep into his chest, and then twisting it to yank the blade out of his brother's choking body. Ina had crumpled into a heap, face forever frozen in an expression of wide-eyed shock and disbelief. It was a terribly ignominious death, and would cause problems, as many would think they had set out to kill him, but Aegon had no time to react or dwell, as just then, the other guards had finally responded, much too late. The two white cloaks died quickly alongside the red cloaks who joined them, and Aegon made a mental note to have all of their names removed from the White Book, for they were not true members of the Kingsguard, and unworthy of the honors accorded to the members of the Order. the noise made when Ina was captured and subsequently killed, and the sounds of the guards fighting Aegon's group drew more opponents to them. The sheer amount of red cloaks was difficult to deal with, but they had a good position, holding their places around the door so that their enemies was forced to come in one or two at a time, quickly meeting the stranger by one of Aegon's people's hands. While the others of their group fought the red cloaks, Aegon slipped away with his uncle and the princess to find and capture Cersei and Wisdom Hallin. They found her in the throne room, ordering the leader of the pyromancers to light the caches. The other two false Kingsguard at the bottom of the dais, Jaime Lannister had, apparently, fled with Valinor and Alex. They would have to be found, and soon, for they were threats as long as they were free. Burn them. Cersei demanded from where she sat on the Iron Throne, her voice and expression wild with rage and insanity. It seemed the stress of the siege had done in the last remaining fragments of her sanity. Aegon had always expected it to happen one day. She had forever been delusional, after all, daring to believe herself more worthy of the title of queen than his caring and beloved mother, and that her mad son would make a better king than he, something not even her own father had believed to be a possibility, else he'd have tried to kill Aegon years ago. Burn all of those savages and usurpers to death. She cried to Hallin, who was bowing. Aegon imagined that his grandfather Aerys had made a similar picture, all those years ago when his father had preformed his coup and seized control of the Iron Throne. May they all rot in the seven hells where they belong. We would not go to your precious seven hells, Sara scoffed, making the pair's heads snap in their direction, horror and shock forming on their faces. Were our souls damned, we should be bound for the dungeons of the other world. But fear not, mad lioness. You will get to see your sacred seven hells soon enough. Hallin bolted for the door, while Cersei screamed at the white-cloaked guards protecting her, or whatever they was doing. Clearly they were both lacking in the brains department, as they'd simply been gawping at them since Sara's first word, making no attempt to take on the people coming to capture or kill, if Sara was the one to reach her first their queen, to defend her and kill the trio. In silent agreement, the princess went after Hallin, while Uncle Oberyn stepped back to take on the second guard while protecting the entrance they had come through, leaving the area free for Aegon to take out the first guard and capture his so-called stepmother. His sword clashed against the knight's own weapon, and he knew immediately that he was the superior fighter. The portly man was sweating profusely already and panting, his strikes were weak and slow. But, as all Aegon's teachers had reminded him many times, all it took was a slippery patch of ground at the wrong time and he'd be killed by a half-trained page. He treated the man as cautiously as he would treat an opponent as skilled as Ser Barristan himself, successfully blocking his strikes and putting the other swordsman, if he was really worthy of the title, on the back foot. Finally, using a maneuver from Essos that he had learned from Oberyn, he twisted the sword out of the other knight's hand and, with a final strike, took the man's head off. That done, Aegon turned on his younger sibling's mother. Underscore 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 underscore. Cersei. Cersei glared bitterly at her stepson, damning him to the deepest, darkest depths of the seven hells, along with his weak mother, his bitch of a sister, grasping whore of a wife and all of his heathen, tree-worshipping Winterlander allies. Her enemies had won, and she couldn't understand how they had done so. Why had the gods aided them? She had never been a religious woman, but both of her parents had assured her that the Seven intended for her to be the vessel that set Lannister blood on the Iron Throne, ensured they would forever be the most powerful of the great houses. She had been so close to achieving her destiny of installing a dynasty of lions in the kingdoms. But things had started going wrong when her father had died, worsened when Jaime took her younger children, and now they were completely in tatters. All hope was lost. She prayed that her son was safe. No doubt Aegon would seek to eliminate his rival, knowing Ina was the preferable choice for king. Curse you! She spat. Curse you to hell and back. Ina is the rightful king. Ina is dead, Aegon informed her flatly. She felt her heart stop, and she shook her head in desperate denial. You're lying. She screamed. You lie. Not my son. Liar. His expression seemed to soften a fraction. I do not lie, Lady Lannister, he answered quietly. She ignored his incorrect address. She was Queen Regent Cersei, not Lady Lannister. But the topic of her son's continued breath outweighed all else, so she ignored it. We intended to capture him and place him on trial for his crimes, but he attacked me and one of my group was forced to kill him in my defense. Cersei could not deny it anymore. He had a look of almost sympathy for her in his purple eyes, and the barbarian and Dornish Manhor looked, to her eyes, to be almost smug. "Kinslayer!" she wailed. "Brother killer!" She jumped from her seat on the Iron Throne, lunging at him and hitting him with her fists, thinking only of making him suffer the same pain she was feeling. "You will pay for this!" she cried as hands then circled her arms and pulled her away from her stepson, whose expression had gone stony. "I will kill you! Kinslayer! Kinslayer! I will kill you if it is the last thing I ever do!" She was dragged away, still screaming curses and threats, and taken to a plain tower room where she was locked in. She fell to her knees, hitting the floor and screaming threats against Aegon, Elia, Rhaenys and everyone who dared defy the Lannisters until she fell unconscious, tears streaming down her cheeks as she dreamed of the world that should have been, where she reigned supreme, her children surrounding her and Jaime at her side as her father and mother both beamed at her with pride, the imp, Elia Martell and her brats having never drawn breath. 5 for him and 3 for you. Gold shall be their crowns and gold their shrouds, Maggie the Frog had said to her, all those years ago. And when your tears have drowned you, the Valonqua shall wrap his hands about your pale white throat and choke the life from you. To her knowledge, Valina and Ilix lived still, though their hair was indeed gold and they had indeed worn actual gold crowns. But her golden boy, Rhaena, was dead, and she was indeed drowning in her tears. Soon, the imp would likely come and choke her to death, as she had been sure he would since his birth had murdered her beautiful mother, and in the midst of her grief at losing her children and crown in one fell swoop, Cersei almost wanted it. Epilogue. The Red Keep, 25th October, 303 AC. Cersei. Cersei paced her small cell agitatedly, pausing to shoot a bitter glare at her surroundings. In deference to her high birth and gender, she had not been placed in the Black Cells, but neither had she been put in accommodations befitting the rightful Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, either. Her so-called room was in a tower in Maegor's Holdfast, about half the size of her closet in her regular rooms. There was nothing in it save a small bed more fit for a low-born servant than a noble lady, with a straw mattress, pillow and wool blanket, and in the corner there was a stand on which a jug and wash basin sat. A chamber pot was in the other corner. She didn't even have a fresh pair of clothes, and her dinner the night before had some bread and cheese with a goblet of wine. It was outrageous. She was Cersei Targaryen of House Lannister, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms and the Lady of Casterly Rock, even if that part was not official. How dare they treat her thusly? It wasn't over, it could not be. Cersei began pacing again, trying to figure out her next move. She had been angry when Jaime took Valina and Ilix away, but now she felt naught but relief. Because of her brother's defiance, there was hope yet. Val was pregnant with Ina's heir, and even if she bore a girl, there was still Ilix. Her little lion cub was young and sweet, but once she turned her attention to readying him to ascend the Iron Throne, he would soon show his claws. She just needed to escape and get to them, then they could rally their forces. That Aegon had allied himself with those tree-worshipping barbarians, their ancient enemies, would surely work against him politically. She jumped in surprise when a section of the wall moved and Oberyn Martell and Varys, the damn spider, entered. "My thanks for your aid, Lord Varys," the Dornishman stated, his dark eyes fixed on her. Cersei glared at him, drawing herself up and sneering at them both. "It is much appreciated, and I shall remember your help." "Always glad to be of service to the crown, Your Highness," Varys responded, bowing slightly to the Viper. "I shall wait for you to finish in the passage." "What do you want?" Cersei sneered at the prince once the Master of Whispers was gone. For a moment she felt a jolt of fear, wondering if he was here to kill her, then dismissed the possibility. Oberyn Martell was a savage Dornish fool, but he was a knight all the same, and he had a strict code of honor. He would not kill a woman. Besides, Maggie the Frog had warned her that the imp would be the one to kill her. It was not Oberyn Martell that she had to fear. Martell studied her with an intense gaze before answering. "Do you love your brother, Lady Cersei?" he inquired in an almost idle tone. "Not the imp, of course." Everybody knows how you feel about him. But your twin. Jaime. Of course I do. Cersei bit back, outraged. Jaime is my twin, my other half. When I am with him, I'm complete. Of course I love him. The Viper nodded slowly. Then he said lowly. You know how I feel about Elia. Cersei froze, a tremble of worry creeping into her mind. Valonqa. Little brother. Oberyn Martell was the youngest of the 3 children of the late Princess Lorza Martell and her consort. My sister Martell sighed. She has ever been my dearest companion, my best friend. We are but a year apart in age, you know. She was always frail, having been born a moon early, but she is a Martell still. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken. She fought through illness after illness as a child, grew beautiful and kind, the son of dawn. She may not be strong in body, but in mind and heart, she is as fierce as any warrior I have crossed blades with, if not fiercer. Every lord and knight in Dawn sought her hand, and many outside of it also. And then, Mother announced that she had arranged for my sweet sister to wed Rhaegar Targaryen. And for a while, Elia loved him. He was, after all, the Silver Prince, the man who would save our kingdom from Aerys madness. What lady could not help but fall in love with him? Twice, she put her life on the line to birth Rhaenys and Aegon, yet he cared naught a jot for her. He humiliated her the day he announced his betrothal to you, and I have never felt such rage as that night, when she wept in my arms after the shame he dealt her. His expression darkened and his fists clenched as he spoke of it. Cersei found herself unable to speak. It was as if her throat had closed over. As years went by, I watched the way Elia was beaten down by you, by Rhaegar, the court Oberyn continued, his tone full of cold anger. And I raged at the injustice, but there was nothing I could do to shield her. I, her brother who swore to protect her, could do nothing to protect her. And now you can, is that it? Cersei interrupted at last. She forced out a laugh. You wish to kill me, I suppose. To avenge the supposed slight to your weak, savage sister's precious honor. Yes, Oberyn answered mildly. Cersei felt herself go weak. She had not expected him to be so blunt about it. She shook her head in denial. You will not, she gasped out, eyes darting around rapidly. I am a lady. I am queen. No, you are not, he cut her off, sounding almost bored. And I will. Your title, I should remind you, has never been that of queen, but of princess consort. And lady you may be, but I have always been of the opinion that a woman's gender does not make her less. I trained my daughters as warriors. I am deeply in love with a woman who sits at the head of armies and will be queen of the Winterlands in her own right one day. You have always been resentful of the limitations placed on you by society due to your sex. Surely you should be glad that I am not allowing it to keep me from treating you as I would treat any man who dared cause my sweet sister such pain. He gave her a mocking smile. She backed away as he stalked towards her. Guards! She cried desperately. Guards! Scream all you like, Martell said darkly and coldly. But they will not come. Both were my squires, and they are loyal to their Princess Elia and her children. Then, before Cersei could do more, he grabbed her throat, and she felt him cut off her breath, her vision darkening into black. Enjoy the 7 hells, Cersei Martell told her as she died. You will see your father and son there. And, I cannot let you die without telling you, my nephew has declared House Lannister forfeit. All the of-age males will be either imprisoned or executed, the women sent to the Silent Sisters. The young boys will all go to become septons or maesters, and the girls will be wed to loyal lords, to ensure that your house is ground to dust. House Lannister's precious legacy will be that of a warning to those who would seek to take what is not theirs. Cross the Targaryens, and you will receive fire and blood. Those were the last words Cersei Lannister ever heard, as she succumbed to blackness and went limp in the Red Viper's grip. Underscore 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 underscore. Oberyn. Sarah was waiting for him, naked in their bed, when he returned. She gave him a seductive smile as he joined her in bed, hooking one of her legs over his and adjusting herself so they were both on their sides, face to face. Is it done? She asked him in a low tone. Aye, it's done, he murmured in reply. Did you speak to your green seers of the White Lion and Circe's younger children? I did, she confirmed. But they are not threats to Aegon's throne. They have gone to the free cities, where all visions show them living out their lives peacefully and quietly, never admitting even to their spouses whom they were here in Westeros. I think it best to let sleeping dogs lie. Yes, you may be right, Oberyn agreed. She arched an eyebrow at him, lips twitching slightly. I may be right. She repeated with mock offense. May. Outrageous, how dare you speak to the Crown Princess of Winter thusly? He felt a smirk grow on his own lips, feeling the lingering traces of guilt he felt at murdering Cersei, nothing very strong and without any traces of regret at his actions, evaporate entirely. Cersei had been a threat as long as she lived, and given her gender, at worst she would have been sent to the Silent Sisters. She had needed to be dealt with, and he had done so. He had staged it as a suicide, to ensure that Aegon would not be tainted by any more rumors than necessary. Thankfully, most Southrons easily believed that a Winterlander would murder Aena, so there were no accusations of kinslaying being flung about. Pray forgive me, my princess, he purred. I beseech you, tell me how I might redeem myself. She grinned mischievously and moved closer. I can think of a few ways for you to regain my favor, she said, before pressing her lips to his as he flipped them over to hover above her slim frame. Underscore 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 underscore. The Isle of Faces, the 12th of December, 304 AC. Aegon. The Isle of Faces was Winterlander territory, fiercely guarded by the First Men, given it was the headquarters of the Green Seers and sacred ground, a veritable forest of weirwood trees. It was from here that most saplings were taken to be planted in fresh godswoods. Here was where, for the past 2 centuries since Cregan had captured it, the Winterlanders crowned their monarchs and where the Green Seers taught their students. The Isle of Faces was also the location his distant uncle, Brynden Bloodraven Ravenstar, born Rivers, had chosen to spend his last years. As promised, he had arranged with Aerys Ravenstar to visit, over a year after the capture of King's Landing. With Aena and Cersei dead and Val and Ilix missing in the free cities and making no attempts to regain the Iron Throne, many believed they were quietly killed, but nobody said a word openly about it. The Westerlander forces had been quick to surrender, knowing their cause was hopeless and unjustified. After that there had been a series of trials to discover whom had sided with the Lannisters under duress and who had done so willingly. The matter of naming a new Lord Paramount and Warden of the West. Eventually, after much debate, the title had been given to Lord Sebastan Farman, whose family had always been loyal to the Targaryens and who was known to dislike the Lannisters, though his oaths had forced him to obey his liege lord. However, he had managed to avoid sending any men to join the Westerland troops that had marched to fight Aegon's own army, excusing it as being due to his family seat being on an island. That had been a large part in why he had not suffered so badly, though the war debt imposed on the West was probably punishment enough for the man. There'd also been the happier occasions of his mother's marriage to Paladin Dane, and the wedding of Princess Lysara to her betrothed, Magna Edarian, and just the regular problems that came with a change of reigns, especially such a tense one as that, not to mention concerns raised among Aegon's nobles about the new alliance between the two halves of Westeros. The announcement of Daeron's future marriage to an as yet unborn daughter of Princess Lysara, to seal the alliance, hadn't made anybody any happier either. But now, a year and 2 months after seizing King's Landing back from his usurping younger brother, Aegon was at last secure enough in position of king to leave the capital on a progress, during which he would visit the Isle of Faces and meet with his four-greats uncle. That was what he was doing now. Only Ser Barristan was attending him, much to the Lord Commander's dismay, and they were met at the dock by Aegon's distant cousin. Aerys wore the simple woolen robes of a green woman, her tree-shaped pendant dangling between her breasts. Her stomach was swollen from pregnancy, though to Aegon's knowledge she had no husband or even a regular lover. From his discussions with the Winterlanders, however, he knew that her child would likely be considered her heir anyway. To the Winterlanders, a child was meant to be born, and it hardly mattered if it was within or without the confines of marriage vows. The Snows typically came behind their true-born siblings in matters of succession, but there was no shame in being or bearing one. The surname difference was a relatively new thing, as well, and one that the people of the north rarely paid attention to. His sand cousins had been flourishing in the northern court, save for some complaints regarding the cold weather. They had sent many letters, delighting in how neither their gender nor their bastardy affected how people there saw them. They did receive some prejudice, but it was due to them being from the south. The taint of centuries of war could not be wiped away so easily as they wished, unfortunately, not due to anything else. "Greetings, Egon the peacemaker, cousin," she greeted him, bowing her head respectfully. "You are welcome to the Isle of Faces. You and your guard must leave your weapons here. This is sacred ground, and no weapon, be it steel or stone, may be brought any further." Sir Barristan grumbled, but followed Egon's order to leave his sword and knife with Egon's own in the small boat they had rowed to the island on. "Greetings, cousin," Egon said as he fell into step with Erila, who immediately began guiding them to the small village. It was barely 5 minutes' walk from the pier, surrounded by a wall of weirwood and full of tiny huts with people in the robes of the green seers going to and fro. Erila took them to one at the far end of the distance. Despite her state and the muggy weather, she seemed indifferent to any discomfort, making her way down the dirt path with all the grace of a queen. Finally she stopped outside a small hut made of weirwood with a thatched roof, gesturing at the faded curtain that served as a door. "In here," she murmured. "He is waiting for you." Egon nodded solemnly, gesturing for Barristan to remain outside before ducking within. Lying on the pallet in the corner was a man older than any other in West Eos. His skin was pale as that of the northern snows, and seemed paper-thin, allowing the blue veins to shine eerily in the dark. On Egon's entrance, he turned his head and opened his eyes to reveal crimson orbs that sent shivers down the young king's spine. "Egg," he croaked out. "Egon Targaryen, 6th of his name, king of the Andals and the Rhoynar, protector of the faith, the peacemaker dragon. The king who has ended centuries of war with the Winterlanders. Come closer, nephew, that I might see you properly." The end.